Friday was Valentine's Day, and few of us got together, and some married people and one single person were talking about how if we don't get anything for our spouses, then we'll be in big trouble. But in Korea, as you know, it's either White Day or Red Day, and on February the 14th, it's the women that have to buy stuff for the men. And on March 14th, it's the normal Valentine's Day as we have it here. And so as we're talking about the troubles that we'll be in if we don't get any flowers or chocolates or anything like that, and after all that, we turn to that one single person. So what do you think about all this? And he turned to us and said, I want to stay single. The long weekend is here, and Monday being a holiday, we have some people on vacation. One I'm thinking in particular is in Honolulu, envious, and people are away this weekend. But I'm so glad that you're here. People have been making comments that those who are coming at 11 o'clock have a very brighter and very good facial expression as they're coming in because it's no longer 9:30 but 11. And so I guess that additional hour and a half, whether drinking coffee or additional sleep, whatever it is, keep it up. As you recall, when Jesus was being captured middle of the night, Peter chops off one of the soldiers' ears, and Jesus puts that ear back on him. But outside of that, this is the final public miracle of Jesus. And this shows his sympathy, which is magnificently shown, and we are given his humanity as well as his deity. We all know that he is God, and the book of John has been talking about all the way up to this point that the reason for writing the book of John is so that people will know that he is the Son of God, and by believing in him, that they will have eternal life. But all the way up to this point, it has been theological, which we need. That's the center message of the Gospel of John. But here we see the humanity side of Jesus. He is showing his sympathy and his affection and his love. And it's really amazing to see that. And this miracle, though so very powerful, occurs only in this gospel. No other gospels contain this story to display the power and nature of Jesus and to increase the faith of those who will be witnessing. This culture that we live in, we are saturated with fantasy and unreal things, and we cannot tell the difference between what is real and what is not real. We have so much special effects. We have aliens, time travelers, transformers, vampires, and witches. We have no idea what is real and what is not real. And when a story like this is told, sometimes we can mistake it and say, well, that is one of the fantasies that may never happen. It's just a story. This is the seventh miracle that John records in this book. As you recall, Jesus turned water into wine. He healed a nobleman's son. He healed the paralyzed man. He created bread and fish, and he walked on water. And of course, the man who was born blind, he healed him and gave him new eyes. There were two other resurrections that Jesus was involved with. Jairus' daughter, who was raised immediately, and another one, Jesus actually interrupts the funeral procession and raises a widow's son. But in both of those cases, they had just died. But in this story today, John 11, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. There was a tradition of belief among the Jews that once a person dies, the spirit of that person hovered over the body for about 2 days. And that's perhaps why Jesus waited till 4 days to come, just so that nobody would misunderstand or nobody would mistake anything, that in fact the spirit had left Lazarus, that he was indeed dead. The Egyptians did everything they could to preserve the corpse, but the Jews did not embalm. So the Jews would immediately put the body in the grave, if you will, just so that the smell would not come out. Let's first meet the critical man. We don't know very much about him other than the fact that he is very, very sick. And by the time the news goes to Jesus, this man probably or maybe perhaps have already died. We don't know. This story takes place in Bethany, but the end of chapter 10, we are told that Jesus left And he went to a place called Bethany. That's another Bethany. So if you can call that place Bethany number 2 and this place Bethany number 1, it takes about a day to get there. So it takes a day, and we are told later that Jesus waits 2 more days. So 1 day for the news to travel, 2 days of waiting, and another day coming to Bethany number 1. Bethany was about 2 miles away from Jerusalem. Jerusalem, that holy place, is an amazing place where you see the place of the temple, and it is on the east side, on the downslope, about 2 miles, not very far from there, where this story takes place. This man, we don't know very much. We don't know his past, but we can assume that he's a believer because his sisters believe, and we know that he's from the family of believers, and also because Jesus loved him. The name Lazarus, not to be confused with the Lazarus the beggar. That was a fictional story that Jesus gave as a parable. He made that story of a man who died and went to that place of torment, but it is not that person. But the name Lazarus is a very common name from the Old Testament, Elazar, a very familiar Hebrew name, whom God helps. It means whom God helps. Bethany is a small village, meaning house of the poor or house of the poverty. We all know, that is all we know about Lazarus is that he's very sick. We don't know what illness he had, but we do know why he was ill. We are told from Scripture that his illness was as a result of God receiving glory. He was sick for the glory of God, but this is nothing new. We know that the man who was born blind, when asked, people questioned, whose sin was it that made this man blind? And of course, we are given the answer, it is neither. It is because of God's glory that this man is blind. But sickness comes because we live in a fallen world. Medical science is getting so to a point where we are living longer and longer. Some people do not want to live long because they may live long, but the wrinkles and everything else, they don't want it. And they become less mobile. They can't drive. They can't do things. They forget things. They want to kind of like live the rest of their lives healthy, but they don't want to live long. I, for one, like to see if I can make it to 150, but people do not like to live long. But even so, we are all going to experience sickness, which is inevitable. In fact, in the Bible, there are sicknesses due to sin. People have tampered with the sanctity of the Lord's Supper, the communion of the bread and wine. And God actually smites a man in Acts chapter 12, was eaten with worms. It's gross to even think about. So we don't know very much about this man. We'll move on to the sisters. We call them the concerned sisters. Martha and Mary, especially Mary, is also an extremely common name. We get this name from Miriam. A variation of Miriam is Mary, the sister of Moses, the deliverer of deliverers. She was the one who saved the life of Israel's greatest hero, as you recall. So many moms named their daughters Miriam. She's also the one who poured the expensive perfume on Jesus' feet and wiped them with her hair. When we talk about the humanity of Jesus, we talk about the fact that he was born, that he lived, that he hungered, he thirsted, that he slept, and then, of course, he died. But it is much, much more than that. His humanity has to do with his human relationship, how he was able to feel and be touched with all the feelings of our weaknesses. He is unlike any other because he is not only God, but is fully man, one of us. But when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days. And I find that kind of fascinating. He goes, I feel bad that he is really ill and I am summoned, so I'm going to stay 2 more days. The disciples were wondering, that's good, because if Jesus goes, we have to go with him, and they're going to try to stone him and us at the same time. It's good that he doesn't go. But Jesus finally says, let's go back. And it's their worst fears. They objected. Are you trying to go back and get yourself killed? Why not just stay here? Let's talk about the confused disciples. Jesus is saying to them, you cannot lengthen the daylight. You cannot shorten the daylight. Just because you are with friends, in other words, no friend can lengthen it, no enemy can shorten it, no precaution will lengthen your life. I'm not to say, that is not to say that you should not take precautions. You ought to drive carefully. You ought to look before you cross. You ought to do things in a very casual, that is, careful manner. Nowadays, I don't even get out of bed without having to slowly get up. And when I go into the showers or whatever, doing it very carefully, making sure that my footing is in place. As you're getting older, obviously, you need to pay attention. But he does say, nothing will happen to me that is outside the plan of God. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is something that we can take. It is food for thought today. Nothing will happen without God's knowledge outside the plan of God. He's saying, I'm not going in the dark. I am going in the light of God's divine day. A day cannot finish before its ordained end. The time allotted to me to accomplish my earthly ministry is fixed by God, and that applies to us as well. Whatever we are given has been allotted by God under His timetable. God is never too early, never too late. He knows exactly where we are. We know our days are numbered, only God knows. He says, he fell asleep. I will go and wake him up. So the disciples said, if he's asleep, that's good. If he is sleeping right now, he is going to eventually get up, wake up. So we don't need to go, Jesus. Let's just stay here. Why risk dying? Let's just stay here. The disciples were always struggling with faith. They believed, but they needed to be strengthened, and strengthened some more. Then we are introduced to Thomas, who is known as the doubter and the pessimist. He says, let's go to and die with Jesus. That sounds like a downer, right? That sounds like a very pessimistic thing. But in actuality, this man had great faith. He was a courageous pessimist, if I can say, opposed to a cowardly pessimist. He says, it might cost us our lives, but let's go anyway. Let's go and die with him. If that's what's going to happen, let's do it. It takes tremendous courage to be able to say that. Whatever happens will happen. Let's just take it on. Let's just do it. That is a man of faith. These people back then lived in a world of death. They did not have a sterile of mortuaries, undertakers, and embalming fluids. Where today we go to a funeral and all we see is a body lying in a casket that's well dressed and made up. Back then, people lived with the horror of death. When Jesus arrived, Lazarus had been dead 4 days. Let's consider what would happen to a body after 4 days that is not embalmed. The Jews wrapped the body, sprinkled spices on it to lessen the smell. The heart has stopped breathing. The body cells are deprived of oxygen and they start to die. Blood drains from throughout the circulatory system and pools in the low places. Muscles begin to stiffen. That sets in after 3 hours. And by 24 hours, the body has lost all its heat. The muscles lose their rigor in 36 hours. By 72 hours, all stiffness is gone, believe it or not, and the body is soft. As cells begin to die, bacteria go to work and body is filled with bacteria. The bacteria in the body of a dead person start to attack, breaking the cells down, and the decomposing tissue takes on a horrific look and smell and emits green liquids. The tissue releases hydrogen sulfide and methane as well as other gases. A horrible smell is discharged. Insects and animals will consume parts of the body if they can get to the body somehow. That is the current condition of Lazarus when Jesus arrives. So Martha says in verse 39, Lord, he has been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. That's the Living Translation. But in the King James Version, it says, by this time he stinketh. That's the literal translation. It is the literal rendering. By this time he stinketh, for he has been dead 4 days. We stink after not taking a shower for a day. If you are dead for 4 days, you can just imagine how a body will be. We have several medical people. At my last count, we have about 8 people in the medical field, and they can testify more than I can how a body might be after 4 days. When someone died, they put them in the ground immediately, and burial followed right away. The procession would go back to the house, and mourners will stay there to comfort them for 7 days. Have you ever heard anything like that? People in the village all would come and stay at your house for 7 days. That may not be a blessing, but they are there to comfort you as you are mourning. In fact, they even hire professional wailers. They will come and wail for you for that 7-day period. And they were not even allowed to eat because while eating, undoubtedly you're going to make some jokes and you're going to make some fun and all that. They did not want any of that out of respect for the dead and the family. They wouldn't even eat. And these professional hire mourners will mourn for 30 additional days publicly afterwards. So when Jesus comes, this is still in full bloom. Sympathy was everyone's duty. And this was traditional comforting. And wailing, which was led by women, was a very loud screaming, not just sobbing, wailing from the top of their lungs, these women who were hired. And we call them professional mourners because they would go from one funeral to the next getting paid. And in those days, to show one's heartache, brokenness, they would rip their clothes. But if they rip solid, good clothes, they would have to purchase new ones. So what they would do is they would sew it in such a way that they can rip and then put it right back. And so they would go to another funeral, get paid, and go to another funeral. They were hired to mourn. Kind of like when I attempt to make a silly joke, I wish we had a little machine that would go, boom, applause. So these hired mourners were paid for that reason. Jesus is coming to a very crowded scene, but the crowd does not know what they are set up to be. They are going to be eyewitnessing the resurrection. So when Martha went to meet him, her sister, Mary, stayed behind, possibly because she was such brokenhearted. You remember that same Mary who sat at Jesus' feet while Martha was in the kitchen, busily preoccupied preparing a meal. And Martha comes to Jesus, Jesus, would you let Mary help me? And Jesus says, Mary has made the right choice. And I want to break away from this a little bit and make an application that what is best? Is worshiping at Jesus' feet important, or is serving the Lord? I want to say there's got to be a balance. That is why at Crosspoint, we have you both serving and worshiping. If you are worshiping, serve. If you are serving, worship. We have 2 services. We are given 2 services to you so that you would do both worshiping and serving. And I encourage all of you, if you're not serving in any area, let's please find a place where you can serve the Lord, whatever it might be. But the same person now scorns Jesus, saying, if you were here, our brother wouldn't have died. She believed that he was the Lord, but did not believe that even he can resurrect a body after 4 days. But she does say, but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. She understood that he is Messiah, that he is the Son of God. So Jesus says, your brother will rise again. So she says, I know that on the last day he will. She even knows the future resurrection. Jesus had not even died, therefore no resurrection. Jesus did not even rise, and yet she has enough faith to know the future resurrection. In verse 25, Jesus told her, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection. He didn't say, I will be. He said, I am the resurrection. He does not say, I can raise the dead. He says, I am the resurrection. This is the 5th of 7 I ams in this book, the name of God. I am the bread of life. I am the living water. I am the light of the world, so on and so forth. I am the resurrection. So verse 25, Jesus says, Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never, ever die. Do you believe this, Martha? May I ask all of you the same question? Do you believe? And fill that name with your own name. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe? If God can create out of nothing everything that lives, then raising bodies out of nothing is just what He does. Do you have any trouble believing that Jesus, that is God who spoke the world into existence? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Do you have any problem believing that He created? If you can accept that God, through mere speaking, let there be light, and there was, when you have no trouble believing in God of creation who created this vast universe that is ever expanding, you should have no trouble believing in Jesus resurrecting a body. Verse 27, she says, "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I have always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God." Brothers and sisters, you are not in charge of where you will die. You are not going to be in charge of how you will die. Christians may not be afraid of dying because when they die, they will be in heaven. But some Christians are afraid of the pain of death. And I can identify if you're into an auto accident or whatever, you're falling. Those are very, very bad way to go, like drowning or whatever the case might be. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 8, verse 8, this is what it says. "None of us can hold back our spirit from departing. None of us has the power to prevent the day of our death." No one. And in Job 14, 1 and 2, "How frail is humanity! How short is life! How full of trouble! We blossom like a flower and then wither. Like a passing shadow, we quickly disappear." Today marks the day that when I first came to America. I'm not going to say how many decades that has been, but time has flew by so fast. We are already almost into March. Wasn't it just yesterday we said, oh, we're going to be faced with this awkward 2025? It is passing by right before our eyes. No matter how young you are, how old you are, I know you can agree with me that time is just passing by. It is the greatest commodity. You can talk about gold and silver, but I believe time cannot be replaced. When you come to worship, make sure that you worship God from your heart with your spirit and truth. Make sure you do not wander away by thinking about things, that you concentrate, that you would focus on God and God alone. We have no control over our life. We're like a flower that blossoms in the morning, but then in the evening we wither. We are like a passing shadow. We quickly disappear, no matter who it is, no matter how popular they are, how absolutely gifted they are as a rapper, as an athlete, as a musician, whatever. No matter who you are, they all will quickly disappear. So the question is, so is that it? There are some people asking that question. Is that where evolution has brought us after supposedly billions of years? To this kind of memoryless, non-existent death, that after we die, there's going to be nothing. And if that is the case, we are all fools for sitting here and not going after our lust and pleasure. If there is nothing beyond this life, if this life that is so short and that is going to disappear in time, so quickly disappearing, are we such fools that we'll be sitting here listening? So what? That we can become a better person today and live maybe a day or two in a little bit better situation? We are all foolish people if this is it. We ought to be going out and doing whatever we want. If you can afford it, buy that great sports car, buy that house, do whatever, get into a relationship, whatever you need to do, because this is all we have. Eat, drink, and be merry. But that is a lie. You are more than protoplasm. You are waiting to become manure. Is that all it is? We're just waiting to become waste? Every human being will live forever. not only in spirit, but in a resurrected body. In one place, a body to absorb eternal punishment. In another place, a body to enjoy eternal bliss. You will be raised from the dead. Every human being will be raised. And Jesus himself will be raising every human person. There are only two possible places of existence after this life. Without God, and that will be a place of horror and punishment. The other place is with God and the joy of blessing and reward. How do you get there? Obviously, by accepting Jesus as the risen Lord, the source of everything that lives. He has the power to create out of nothing, power to raise the dead. He made everything animate and inanimate, smallest cell to the most complex human. Death, brothers and sisters, is not the end. It is a split-second transition. For some of you who have been a Christian from your mother's womb, this may not apply strongly. But those who have lived a so-called a sinful life, that is, before you became a child of God, you have this past before conversion days and post-conversion days. I want to tell you that the moment that you die, that transition from this life to the next is much less of transition than the transition that you experienced from your previous before, pre-conversion and post. So when you became to know the Lord, that transition was a greater degree of change than what you will experience at the time of your death. Paul the Apostle said, to be absent from the body is to be with the Lord. It would have been bad if we have to stay in the ground for thousands of years, rotting away. Our physical body will certainly rot away, but our eternal soul will be with the Lord simultaneously. In a twinkling of an eye, we will be with the Lord. And that is why at funerals, we confidently are able to say, this is not it. People dress up in caskets, all dressed up and have no place to go. No, there is a place to go. Is it heaven or is it hell? And if you are contemplating where to go, I think this is a no-brainer. Choose to be with God. Death is not the end. Wow, end of my notes already. No more to say. I hate to cut it right in the middle, but next week is going to be the actual resurrecting of Lazarus. Don't miss it. Come back next week.
In Christ alone, I place my trust and find my glory in the power of the cross. In every victory, let it be said of me, my source of strength, my source of hope.